you don't forget the sound, not the gunfire, though there was plenty of that, but the dog. A single frantic bark echoing inside a cold garage on North Clark Street. 7 men on a wall, the smell of gasoline and winter. 2 uniforms that weren't what they seemed. Chicago, Valentine's Day, 1929. The moment when bootleggers turned a holiday into a headline, and a city asked, who dared to do this? If you're new here, take a second to subscribe. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. First, the world they were living in. Prohibition didn't just outlaw liquor, it built an industry around breaking that law. After the 18th Amendment and the Volstead Act defined alcohol above 0.5% as contraband, America's cities transformed. Speakeasies bloomed like neon flowers. Behind them stood crews that dealt in bribes, hijackings, and murder, with Chicago's homicide rate rising during these years as rival outfits fought to own the thirst of a nation. On one side of that war, the North Side Gang, brash, efficient, and by the mid-1920s, led by George Bugs Moran. He got his nickname from that stare, hard, unblinking, and a temper to match. His crew ran speakeasies, gambling rooms, and rackets. They could loot a warehouse and crack a safe with the same professional calm, but they were always staring across the street at the bigger beast, the Chicago outfit, first under Johnny Torrio, then, more famously, Al Capone. The rivalry wasn't a petty feud. It was a death spiral. After the daring ambush on Torrio in 1925, he survived, barely. The old boss left Chicago and handed power to Capone. Money surged. The outfit was pulling in tens of millions a year, with a payroll that looked like a small city's bureaucracy, and bribes to match. Moran's North Siders hit back in waves, including a brazen 1926 assault at Capone's Hawthorne Hotel. 1,000 rounds sprayed a building that seemed untouchable. No one died, but the message got through. No one was safe. Business strangely coexisted with blood. The Purple Gang from Detroit shipped Canadian whiskey, Old Log Cabin, to Capone, who sold it on to Moran. When Moran chased cheaper booze, the partnership blew up. He asked to come back. Capone refused. Soon, hijackings followed, targeting the Purple Gang shipments, and a line crossed from rivalry into vendetta. In this city, you didn't just lose a deal, you lost friends. You lost ground, and eventually, people lost their lives. Here's what we know. It's the morning of Thursday, February 14th, 1929. A Lincoln Park garage, 2122 North Clark Street. 7 men gather inside. The room smells of oil and dust. A mechanic named John May is fixing a truck wheel. His dog, Highball, is tied to a post nearby. The others? Moran's core, Albert Kachalek, better known as James Clark, his second-in-command and brother-in-law, Adam Heyer, the bookkeeper who kept the money moving, Albert Weinshank, who ran cleaning and dyeing operations, the Gusenberg brothers, Frank and Peter, enforcers who handled violent problems, and a hanger-on, Reinhard Schwimmer, a former optician who liked being near the glow of danger. They were waiting. Some say for a hijacked truck of liquor, others say for Moran himself. Either way, they were in their suits and in harm's way. Around 10:30 to 10:35 a.m., a black Cadillac rolls up outside. 2 men in police uniforms, 3 in plain clothes. They walk into the garage. Outside, not far away, Moran himself spots what looks like a police car and decides to keep moving. Coffee is suddenly safer than whatever's happening inside. On the garage floor, the 7 men are ordered to line up against the wall. They're unarmed, and they do as they're told. The first volley comes from Thompson submachine guns, Tommy guns, infamous for their drum magazines. The shooters rake the line 3 times, head, chest, belly. Then a shotgun is used, A finishing strike on Clark and May. 70 rounds from the Thompsons. One shotgun shell in that initial burst. Neighbors won't forget it. But it's the dog that breaks the silence that follows. Highball's desperate barks, drawing attention to a room that's almost silent now. The killers leave in a cruel pantomime. The two in uniforms march the two arrested men in plain clothes out, as if it were a raid, not a slaughter. Inside, 6 men are dead. One is somehow alive. Frank Gusenberg. He crawled 20 feet after being hit multiple times. At the hospital, a police sergeant asks, "Who shot you?" His answer, "No one." He dies shortly after. The code holds, even at the end. The city erupts. Reporters flood presses. Photographers crowd the blood-stained concrete. Chicago's investigative apparatus splinters into motion. District police, the Detective Bureau, the Illinois Attorney General, and the coroner's office all open their own inquiries, often stepping on each other's feet. At one point, a federal prohibition administrator suggests it was the police themselves, a claim he retracts later that day. But the damage is done. Headlines don't retract. The case is instantly radioactive. Coroner Herman Bundesen does something unusual. He stages a reenactment the very next day, right there in the garage. He populates a panel with prominent Chicago citizens instead of a standard jury, and even brings Highball, the dog, back into the space. It's theater, yes, but it's also an attempt at clarity. Bullets are measured, lines of fire imagined, and then science takes the lead. Enter Dr. Calvin Goddard, the pioneering force in forensic ballistics. He sets up a lab in Chicago with private funding and begins testing bullets and shell casings with meticulous patience. He examines the Chicago Police Department's Thompsons and determines they weren't the weapons used. It sounds small, but it matters. It undermines the police execution rumor and restores a sliver of public trust. While narrowing the field of suspects, detectives go door to door. At a rooming house across from the garage, the landlady describes 2 supposed taxi drivers who took a front room overlooking the street. Possible lookouts. One is identified as Byron Bolton, another as Jimmy the Swede. Nearby, another landlady mentions a 3rd taxi driver who kept odd hours, often joined by 2 men late morning. A photo lineup points fingers toward a member of Detroit's Purple Gang, Harry Keywell, but he produces a solid alibi. It's a pattern the case can't seem to escape. Tip, spark, dead end. Then a break. Maybe a week after the massacre, a garage fire on Wood Street reveals a partially dismantled and burned 1927 Cadillac sedan. Tools lie scattered. A police siren sits charred in a corner. A drum magazine, a Luger pistol. Witnesses recall a man with fresh burns seeking a doctor. The car had been bought under the name James Morton of Los Angeles. It leads nowhere by itself, but it starts sketching an outline, a fake police car, carefully prepped, then destroyed. Investigators connect threads beyond Chicago. In St. Louis, crews had a habit of using police disguises, especially a man named Fred Burke, tied to Egan's Rats, a legendary gang. Burke is missing a front tooth. A local witness who saw the police driver that morning noted the same detail. Suddenly, names start to form. Burke, his associate James Ray, an alias for Gus Winkler, and ties back to Detroit's Purple Gang and Capone's network that moved whiskey like water through the Midwest. Days later, another car is found, this time a 1926 Peerless, blown up in Maywood. There's a police siren, shotgun shells matching the brand used in the massacre, detective squad-style plates, and tellingly, a small notebook belonging to victim Albert Weinshank. Some call it staged, a plant to mislead detectives. Others say It proves a second car. In a case already fogged with misdirection, it deepens the maze. Pressure lands on the outfit. Capone is in Florida. He'll soon claim bronchopneumonia when a grand jury calls him to Chicago, but the local crew still feels heat. Chicago police arrest Jack McGurn, a prolific hitman, and others like John Scalise and Albert Anselmi. Charges pile up, then collapse. Lack of evidence. And then, more violence. Capone reportedly discovers Scalise and Anselmi plotting against him. He invites them to dinner. A baseball bat does the talking. Their bodies are found on May 8th, 1929. One message replaces another. Don't look at me, look at the city we've become. The case cools until December 1929. In St. Joseph, Michigan, a drunk driver smashes into another car. A patrolman, Charles Skelly, intervenes. The driver shoots him and flees. The name? Fred Burke. Police hit his bungalow and find a small arsenal, 2 Thompsons with drum magazines, a sawed-off shotgun, rifles, thousands of rounds, tear gas bombs, and a cache of stolen bonds. Forensics ties the Thompsons directly to the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. One had also been used in the murder of New York mobster Frankie Yale. It's one of the first great triumphs of American ballistic science, but it doesn't close the case. Burke is captured in 1931, but not for the massacre. Michigan tries him for Officer Skelly's murder. He's convicted and sentenced to life. In Chicago, Coroner Bundesen closes his inquest later that year. His conclusion is chilling in its simplicity. The killers were by persons unknown. A city drenched in clues can't name a single shooter in court. So who planned it? The shadow looms largest around Al Capone. He denied involvement. He was in Florida, but motive wasn't in short supply. The North Side gang was bleeding his business, and the way the murders were done, cold, methodical, with police disguises, felt like a message from a boss who knew performance mattered as much as results. Still, speculation isn't a conviction, and Capone never faced trial for the massacre. In 1935, a name from the early investigation resurfaces. Byron Bolton, believed to be a lookout across the street, is arrested on unrelated charges. He talks. He says the killers were Fred Getz, Gus Winkler, Fred Burke, Ray Nugent, and Bob Carey. He claims Capone gave the order to kill Moran, and that inside the garage, nobody knew what Moran looked like, so the shooters killed everyone present rather than miss him. Georgette Winkler, the widow of Gus, had named similar figures in her memoir. It feels like a puzzle piece snapping in, but it's not the last word. Historians argue. Jonathan Eig points out that some of Bolton's named men had alibis, and that such a sprawling plot makes less sense than a simpler one. If you want Moran dead, you put a man outside his house. You don't orchestrate a high-risk theater piece and hope he walks in. Other theories point to Three-Fingered Jack White, a vicious killer known to use police disguises, driven by revenge for a murdered cousin. But White was in jail for much of 1926 to mid-1929. The dates just don't line up. Another respected theory from criminologist Arthur Bialik places Tony Accardo, who would later rise to lead the outfit, among the gunmen in a team assembled by Jack McGurn alongside Burke, Winkler, Getz, and Carey. It's consistent with how power in Chicago moved through deeds first, titles later. Yet without courtroom proof, the massacre remains a mirror, showing us who we want to see, not necessarily who was there. Here's the blunt truth. There was no trial for the St. Valentine's Day Massacre itself. McGurn and others were arrested. Charges were dropped for lack of evidence. Burke, whose Thompsons were linked forensically to the killings, was tried not for the massacre, but for the murder of Patrolman Skelly and received life in prison. As for Capone, justice found him in another way. Indicted on 22 counts of income tax fraud, tried in October 1931, convicted, and sentenced to 11 years. Chicago didn't convict a massacre, it convicted a ledger. It's unsatisfying. It should be. The victims' families never heard a verdict read aloud with the right names attached. The city got a headline, not a resolution. When the coroner finally closed the inquest in November 1931, his written words felt like a shrug. The killings were by persons unknown. That line still echoes. Violence didn't vanish after the massacre. It consolidated. By 1930 to 1931, Capone's outfit had swallowed much of the North Side's territory. But the massacre did something else too. It shocked the country. The Thompson submachine gun, its grim efficiency on brutal display, became a symbol of a nation outgunned by its own criminals. Alongside the crimes of men like John Dillinger and the assassination attempt that killed Chicago's mayor, Anton Cermak. It helped drive momentum toward federal gun control. The National Firearms Act of 1934 was born from that moment, taxing machine guns and licensing dealers, a legislative signature underwritten by blood and panic. The physical scene of the crime kept changing. The garage at 2122 North Clark was demolished in 1967. The lot turned to grass. But history has a way of refusing to go quietly. The bricks from that bullet-chewed wall were removed, sold, and displayed for years as macabre souvenirs. Many were scattered to private hands. The remainder, fewer every decade, now belong to the Mob Museum in Las Vegas. People still line up to look. We're drawn to artifacts that once watched death arrive and leave without a name. The massacre seeped into books, films, television. Part history lesson, part cautionary tale, part American myth. Yet its power isn't just in the imagery of straw hats and gunsmoke. It's in the core contradiction, a crime everyone knows, with answers no one can prove. That limbo haunts. That's why we're still here, almost a century later, trying to trace a trigger squeeze through reports and rumors and the stubborn silence of the dead. In a way, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre is less a whodunit than a what did it do. It changed the city. It shifted power. It scared a country into passing laws. It elevated legends and erased 7 names on a wall. And it left behind one of the strangest truths in American crime. Sometimes the loudest murders leave the quietest answers. If this deep dive kept you hooked, hit subscribe. It helps more than you know, and it ensures you won't miss the next story that asks hard questions and doesn't flinch at the answers. Sleep well tonight. Somewhere, a garage stands empty, but the echo is still there, and the dog is still barking.